March 1982. The gated community of Zelenaya Roshcha, nestled 40 kilometers from Leningrad. Beyond the wrought iron gates and manicured gardens, a world thrived that the evening news never dared to reveal. Here, on crystal glasses, chilled Baltic herring shared the table with imported French cheese. In the dimly lit garages rested sleek black Volgas, and from hidden tape decks, forbidden jazz records whispered melodies banned by the censors. This enclave was its own universe, a microcosm where power dictated reality, where laws twisted like smoke in the wind, and where promises were as fragile as the frost on the Neva at dawn. But on that cold, wind-laden night, the fragile calm shattered. From the dense pines bordering the settlement came a sound unlike any other, a piercing, guttural scream that sliced through the silence. It was not the drunken laughter of factory workers spilling out from the local tavern, nor the distant howl of a stray dog. It was a scream carved from pure, unfiltered fear, the cry of a man who suddenly understood that the hunter had become the hunted. Inside his modest apartment, the district militia officer pulled his collar tighter against the chill and turned the volume of the television higher. He had long learned to ignore the strange happenings in the forest, especially when the sons of influential officials roamed the shadows. They were untouchable, a law unto themselves. Yet tonight was different. Tonight, the forest stirred with an ancient wrath, awakening something older than the city itself. Something that remembered the horrors of siege and bloodshed. Something that had waited patiently through decades of silence. A presence long dormant was stirring, and with it, the scales of justice began to tilt, not by decree, but by the cold hand of retribution. Before we journey deeper into this tale, I ask you to pause and subscribe. Click like. Not just as a gesture, but as a pledge that these stories will not fade into oblivion, that we will remember the limits of cruelty, and that sometimes justice does not wear a judge's robes, but the worn uniform of an old soldier. Thank you for staying with us. To understand how the quiet forests of the Leningrad region transformed into a place of dread, we must first meet Elena Ivanovna. To the neighbors, she was simply Ivanovna, a stoic, slender woman in her late 60s, her silver hair always neatly pinned beneath a faded headscarf. She lived at the edge of the settlement in a weathered wooden cottage that seemed swallowed by the towering birches and oaks around it. Ivanovna was known for her legendary honey cake, which she sold at the market for a handful of kopecks, and for her kindness to the children who played near her garden. Yet, none of the nouveau riche residents, with their tailored suits and polished boots, had any inkling of the woman's past. They saw only her quiet hands, calloused from decades of tending the earth, hands that trembled when she brewed her bitter tea. They whispered of age and frailty, never imagining the steel that lay beneath the surface. Elena Ivanovna Morozova, former sniper of the Red Army, 40 confirmed enemy kills. The Germans called her the Ice Maiden. She could lie motionless in a snowdrift for days, waiting patiently for a single flash of an enemy's uniform. For everyone else, the war ended in 45. For her, it had only paused. That night, as the wind whispered through the towering pines, Elena Ivanovna sat by the cracked window of her modest cottage, the faint glow of a kerosene lamp casting long shadows on the peeling wallpaper. Her gnarled hands rested on the worn wooden table, fingers tracing the delicate pattern of a honey cake she had baked earlier that day. The scent of honey and spices mingled with the cold, damp air seeping through the window's cracks. Outside, the gated community lay silent, its manicured lawns and pristine facades belying the unease that had settled over Zelenaya Roshcha like a thick, suffocating fog. The officer's patrol car had long since vanished down the winding road, leaving only the distant howls of wolves, a reminder that the forest had not forgotten its ancient dominion. Elena Ivanovna's eyes, sharp despite the years etched upon her face, scanned the darkness beyond the glass. Somewhere, deep within the forest, the earth seemed to pulse with a restless energy, as if the trees themselves remembered the bloodshed and betrayal that had once stained their roots. She inhaled slowly, the taste of burnt pine needles and winter frost filling her lungs. And for a fleeting moment, the stoic mask she wore slipped. Memories surfaced unbidden. Gunmetal skies over Stalingrad, the bitter cold biting through her uniform, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat as she steadied her breath and took aim. 40 lives had passed through her sights, each one a thread in a tapestry of survival and vengeance. Now, in this place of comfort and pretense, those threads tugged at her conscience, weaving a silent promise of reckoning. A sudden rustle from the shadows snapped her attention back to the present. The militia officer, his face pale and drawn, approached cautiously, his hand resting on the grip of his service pistol. He had seen enough to know that the night was far from ordinary, that beneath the veneer of law and order, something far older and more merciless stirred. "Elena Ivanovna," he whispered, voice heavy with a mixture of fear and respect. "The forest, it's awake again, and it's hungry." She nodded slowly, a steely resolve hardening in her gaze. "Then it is time," she replied quietly. "Time to remind them why the Ice Maiden still watches these woods." The officer's breath hung in the cold air, mingling with the faint scent of pine resin and damp earth. "Elena Ivanovna," he began cautiously, "the forest has always been restless, but last night it was different. The scream, like a soul torn in two." His eyes, shadowed beneath a fur-lined hat, met hers with a mixture of fear and respect. She nodded slowly, her gaze drifting toward the darkened tree line. "The Ice Maiden does not forget," she said quietly, voice roughened by years and hardship. "The forest remembers every betrayal, every spilled drop of blood. It calls for balance, for reckoning." A shiver ran through the officer, as if the very trees whispered secrets meant only for the dead. The residents fear what lurks beyond their walls, yet they refuse to believe it can harm them. They see only luxury and safety. But you've seen the truth. Yelena's eyes hardened. They live behind gates and walls, but no fortress can hold back the past. The forest does not judge by wealth or rank. It demands justice in its own way. The wind stirred the branches, carrying with it a low, mournful howl, half animal, half something older, something unforgiving. She reached beneath her coat, fingers curling around the cold metal of a worn bayonet, a relic from battles long past but far from forgotten. "We will watch," she said, voice steady like the frost that clings to the earth. "And when the time comes, the Ice Maiden will answer the forest's call." The officer swallowed hard, knowing that the fragile peace of Zelenaya Roshcha was about to shatter, and that the reckoning would be swift, merciless, and absolute. The militia officer stood awkwardly beneath the twisted branches, their shadows pooling like ink across the snow-dusted ground. His breath steamed in the crisp air, mingling with the faint scent of pine and something older, something like iron and decay. "Elena Ivanovna," he began hesitantly, "there have been more screams. Late at night, people hear them. Neighbors. Dogs howl until they refuse to eat. Some say they see figures moving beyond the tree line. It's unsettling." Elena Ivanovna's pale eyes, sharp as frozen steel, did not waver. She folded her hands over her worn lapel, the scars beneath the skin of her fingers, telling stories she never spoke aloud. "The forest remembers," she said quietly, voice steady yet weighted with the years. "It is not the land that wakes, but the ghosts we buried beneath its roots, the betrayal, the bloodshed. They call for reckoning." The officer swallowed, feeling the chill deepen beyond the temperature. Should we warn the residents, the people inside the gates? They do not know what lies just beyond their fences. She shook her head slowly. They will not listen until the forest itself demands it. And then it will be too late for warnings. The Ice Maiden does not linger on empty threats. A faint, bitter smile touched her lips. I once gave death to those who deserved it. Now the forest summons me to do the same. From the darkness between the trees, a low growl rumbled, an ancient sound that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the earth. Elena Ivanovna rose from her chair, steady despite the years, and reached for the worn leather satchel at her side. Inside lay tools not merely of survival, but of judgment. Tonight, she whispered, we pay our debts. The past is never silent. It watches. It waits. The officer nodded, knowing that whatever peace they had known in Zelenaya, Roshcha was unraveling, thread by fragile thread. And in the depths of the forest, something older than war stirred, hungry for justice long denied. As twilight bled into darkness, Elena Ivanovna stood at the edge of the forest, the chill wind tugging at her worn coat. The scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filled the air, mingling with the faint, metallic tang that always accompanied the forest's unrest. Her eyes, sharp despite the years etched into her face, scanned the shadowed tree line where ancient pines whispered secrets only she could hear. Behind her, the distant hum of the gated community's generators and the soft glow of manicured street lamps seemed like a fragile barrier against the encroaching wild. Within those walls, the nouveau riche lived their insulated lives, cloaked in ignorance, their laughter and music oblivious to the sinister pulse growing just beyond. A soft rustle broke the silence. Yelena's hand instinctively moved to the old leather strap across her shoulder, the weight of a long-retired sniper rifle, a relic of war and justice. The forest was calling, demanding reckoning not just for forgotten blood spilled decades ago, but for the arrogance of those who dared to claim dominion over sacred ground. Footsteps approached from the settlement's side, a hesitant figure emerging from the shadows. The militia officer's face was pale, eyes wide with a terror that no report or protocol could contain. "Elena Ivanovna," he whispered, voice trembling. They found another one. A child, vanished near the edge of the trees. The people, they won't listen. They're too blind, wrapped in their comforts. She nodded solemnly, the weight of history settling heavier upon her shoulders. "The forest remembers," she said softly, voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "And it will not forgive." Together, they turned towards the dark heart of the woods, where shadows danced and ancient justice waited to be served. Tonight, the past would bleed into the present, and the Ice Maiden would rise once more. The moon hung low and swollen behind a veil of restless clouds as Elena Ivanovna tightened the worn leather strap around her wrist. The cold metal of her old sniper rifle, polished until it gleamed faintly in the pale light, felt like an extension of her own arm, steady, resolute, and unyielding. Every scar etched into the wood and steel whispered stories of battles long past, yet the hunger in the forest stirred anew, reviving memories she had buried beneath years of silence. The militia officer waited by the edge of the gate, his breath visible in the chill night air, eyes darting nervously toward the dark thicket where the trees seemed to lean in, as if eager to witness the reckoning. His uniform was ill-fitting, the badge barely catching the light. But beneath his trembling exterior lay a steadfastness born from witnessing horrors that the wealthy residents refused to acknowledge. He glanced sideways at Yelena, respect mingling with fear. "They don't understand," he muttered, voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't just superstition. The forest remembers. It hungers. Elena nodded, her gaze drifting toward the shadowed silhouettes of ancient pines standing sentinel beyond the manicured lawns. The gated community, with its pristine facades and false security, was a fragile bubble, one that would soon burst, spilling secrets long suppressed. The howls had grown louder, more desperate, a chorus of the wrong-seeking balance. "Tonight," she said, voice low and steady, "we become the forest's justice. Not for the living, but for the forgotten." Together, they stepped past the threshold, leaving behind the flickering streetlights and the hollow safety of wealth. The forest embraced them, cold and unyielding, its breath a whisper through the needles and dead leaves. Somewhere deep within, the Ice Maiden's final battle awaited, a reckoning not just of men, but of memory, blood, and the unforgiving silence of the earth itself. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it a whisper colder than the biting frost that clung to the pines. Elena Ivanovna tightened the worn leather strap around her wrist, the relics she bore. An old, rusted iron cross, a faded photograph, a shard of obsidian pressed close to her chest beneath her heavy coat. The forest loomed before her like a dark cathedral, its twisted branches reaching out like waiting hands, eager to reclaim the souls who had forgotten the price of trespass. Behind her, the militia officer hesitated at the thicket's edge, his breath visible in ragged puffs, eyes wide as he swallowed the lump of fear lodged in his throat. "You really think it will come tonight?" he asked, voice barely more than a rasp. Elena's gaze did not waver. "It has already come. The forest does not wait for invitations. It does not bargain with the living. It demands." A distant howl pierced the night, jagged and raw, as if the earth itself was crying out for blood. The officer flinched, gripping the butt of his service pistol, but Yelena's steady presence anchored him in place. "The people inside those walls," she murmured, nodding toward the faint glow of Zelenia Roshcha's lamps. "They sleep wrapped in lies. They believe their money and their walls can protect them from what lies beneath. But the forest remembers. It always remembers." Beneath their feet, the soil seemed to throb, alive with a slow pulsing rhythm, heartbeats of the earth, old and unforgiving. Elena stepped forward, each footfall firm and deliberate, carving a path into the shadows where the ancient trees whispered secrets older than time. "Tonight," she said, voice low and certain, "the Ice Maiden will walk for justice, and those who have turned their backs on the past will finally face its reckoning." The officer swallowed hard, knowing he was witnessing the last fragile moments before the calm shattered. Somewhere deep within the tangled darkness, something stirred, a presence as old as the forest itself, patient, relentless, and hungry for balance. And the night was nowhere near over. The moon hung low behind a veil of fast-moving clouds, casting the forest in an ethereal, muted glow. Elena Ivanovna stood at the edge of the tree line, her breath mingling with the cold night air in small, bitter puffs. Her gloved hands rested on the worn stock of her rifle, and the silver pendant around her neck, etched with ancient runes, caught what little light there was and shimmered faintly. Behind her, the gated community's distant lights flickered like fragile stars, oblivious to the storm of shadows gathering beyond their borders. The militia officer lingered a few steps away, his eyes darting nervously between the darkness and Yelena's resolute figure. "They don't listen," he whispered, voice rough with apprehension. "They think it's just superstition, but the forest, it's angry. Every night, the screams grow louder. Last week, 2 children vanished near the old birch grove. No trace, no sign, just silence where there should be laughter." Elena's gaze did not waver. Silence is the forest's language, a warning, a reckoning. They have forgotten the blood spilled on this ground, forgotten the promises broken beneath these boughs. I will remind them. A sudden rustling stirred the branches above, and a cold wind swept down the path, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and something darker. Decay, or perhaps the echo of ancient sorrow. The officer swallowed hard. "Are you certain this is the way? Once the Ice Maiden rises, there is no turning back." She turned to him then, eyes glinting with a fierce, otherworldly light. "Justice is never gentle, Militia. The forest remembers, and I am its voice." With that, Elena stepped forward into the darkness, the snow crunching softly beneath her boots. The forest seemed to exhale around her, its breath cold and unforgiving. Somewhere deep within, the Ice Maiden stirred, ready to awaken and deliver the reckoning long overdue. As twilight deepened, the shadows lengthened like dark fingers, stretching from the heart of the forest towards Zelenaya Roshcha. The crisp air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine resin, a wild perfume that seemed to pulse with life beneath the stillness. Elena Ivanovna stood at the forest's edge, her breath steady despite the cold gnawing at her bones. In her gloved hands she clutched the weathered blade, a relic passed down from a time when blood and honor were inseparable. It was more than a weapon. It was a key to the ancient power that stirred beneath the roots. Nearby, the militia officer shifted uneasily, his flashlight beam jittering as it caught glimpses of twisted branches and fallen leaves. He glanced at Yelena, admiration tangled with fear in his eyes. "Are you sure this is the right way?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Yelena's gaze was fixed on the darkness ahead, where the trees seemed to lean inward, forming a natural cathedral of shadow and silence. "The forest knows," she replied, her tone cold and unyielding. "It remembers. It waits for the reckoning." Behind them, the lights of Zelenaya Roshcha flickered weakly, a fragile barrier against the wildness encroaching on their carefully constructed world. Within those gilded walls, the wealthy slept in ignorant complacency, blind to the horrors festering at their doorstep. But tonight, the forest would speak. Tonight, the Ice Maiden would awaken. A sudden rustle broke the silence, a soft, deliberate sound that sent a shiver down the officer's spine. Yelena's eyes narrowed, the years of battle sharpening her senses to a razor's edge. "Stay close," she commanded, stepping forward with the certainty of one who has walked these paths in dreams and nightmares alike. The ancient trees seemed to breathe around them, their gnarled limbs whispering secrets older than time. Somewhere deep within the shadows, a presence stirred, waiting, watching, demanding justice long denied. And as the night closed in, Elena Ivanovna felt the cold fire of vengeance ignite within her soul. The reckoning had begun. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of pine resin and something colder, like frost creeping over bare skin. Elena tightened her grip on the worn wooden stock of her sniper rifle, the metal cold and familiar beneath her fingers. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the dense tree line beyond the gated enclave as if the forest itself whispered secrets into her ear. "Do you feel it?" she asked quietly, not turning to the militia officer at her side. He swallowed hard, the weight of his uniform suddenly heavier. "Yes, the children went missing again last night, near the edge where no one dares to tread." Elena's jaw clenched. The Ice Maiden's slumber was ending, and with her awakening, the forest's ancient justice would spill over the veneer of this community's complacency. The wealthy residents continued their charades behind iron gates and manicured hedges, oblivious or willfully blind to the darkness gnawing at their doorstep. "They think money protects them," Elena said, voice low and fierce. "But the forest remembers. It remembers every broken promise, every whispered lie. It's time to remind them." The militia officer nodded, his gaze drifting to the silhouettes of patrols moving listlessly through the streets. a stark contrast to the restless shadows lurking beneath the canopy. What happens when the Ice Maiden rises? Yelena's eyes gleamed like frozen steel. Justice, cold, relentless, and inescapable. From the depths of the forest, a faint melody began to weave through the air, a haunting song, fragile as frost on glass, yet heavy with centuries of sorrow. The Ice Maiden was stirring. Together, they stepped forward, crossing the threshold where civilization's light dimmed and the ancient darkness waited, patient and unyielding. The reckoning had begun. The officer's breath came out in ragged puffs, each one vanishing swiftly into the frigid night air. He kept glancing toward the tree line, where shadows writhed and shifted as if alive, reluctant to step fully into the forest's embrace, but unwilling to retreat. Yelena moved ahead with unwavering purpose, her boots crunching against the frost-hardened earth, the weight of the relics at her belt grounding her to the task at hand. A sudden stillness fell, a silence so absolute that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then, faint at first, a chilling melody wound through the branches. The Ice Maiden's lament. It was not a song, but a dirge, a mournful summons that spoke of ancient grievances and blood debts long unpaid. "Do you hear it?" Elena whispered, her voice barely more than a breath, yet it carried the authority of ages. The officer nodded, swallowing hard, the admiration in his eyes mingling uneasily with dread. From the depths of the forest, a pale light began to glow, ethereal and cold, casting skeletal shadows across the trees. The air thickened with frost, the very ground seeming to pulse beneath their feet as the Ice Maiden stirred, her vengeance awakening from a long, unforgiving slumber. There would be no reprieve tonight. The reckoning had come, and it would consume all who had forgotten the price of their sins. Yelena's breath frosted the air as she moved deeper into the shadowed woods, each step muffled by a thick carpet of frost-hardened leaves. The rifle in her hands was steady, its cold metal a stark contrast against the ancient, worn leather of her gloves. Around her waist, the relic blade hung, a silent promise of the old ways, a symbol of the forest's wrath and mercy intertwined. The militia officer followed cautiously, his eyes darting between the gnarled branches and the faint, shimmering glow that now began to pulse faintly ahead. "Do you hear that?" he whispered, voice barely carrying over the whispering wind. Yelena nodded, lips tight. The haunting melody, the song of the Ice Maiden, wove through the trees, an eerie lullaby that twisted the air with its spectral chill. It was both a warning and a summons, a call to reckon with the sins etched deep into the earth beneath their feet. "This forest remembers," Yelena said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of generations. "It remembers the blood spilled, the promises shattered, and it will not forget again." A sudden rustle to their left made the officer tense, but Yelena's sharp gaze caught the faintest flicker of pale blue light, a spectral shimmer that hovered just beyond the reach of their lanterns. The Ice Maiden was near, her presence a cold, inevitable tide rising to wash away the corruption festering at the edges of Zelenaya Roshcha. "Stay close," Yelena commanded, stepping forward with a resolve that seemed to draw the night itself tighter around her. The reckoning was coming, and in the depths of this ancient forest, justice would be carved anew, silent, swift, and unforgiving. Yelena's breath formed fragile clouds in the frigid air as she stepped deeper beneath the skeletal arches of the birch grove. Each footfall was muffled by a thick carpet of frost-hardened leaves, and the oppressive silence weighed heavier with every step. The officer followed, his hand twitching near the holster of his pistol, eyes darting nervously to the shifting shadows between the pale trunks. A distant wind whispered through the branches, carrying with it a mournful, almost melodic sigh, an eerie lullaby that seemed to seep from the very roots of the earth. Yelena's grip tightened on her relic blade, the metal humming faintly against the cold, a subtle resonance born of ancient blood and forgotten oaths. Her dark eyes scanned the tangled boughs, searching for the pulse of the forest's memory. "The children," the officer breathed, voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think it's them or something else?" Elena's gaze hardened. "They are not lost by chance. This place remembers every broken promise, every spilled drop of innocence. The Ice Maiden stirs, and with her comes reckoning, not mercy." Ahead the air seemed to crystallize, frost forming delicate patterns like frozen tears upon the bark. From the shadows emerged a figure, pale as moonlight, draped in a gown woven of ice and shadow. Her eyes shone with a cold fire, ancient and unyielding. The forest held its breath. "You tread on sacred ground," Elena intoned, voice steady despite the chill that seeped into her bones. "The sins of this community have awakened you. Will you grant us justice, or will we be consumed by your frozen wrath?" The Ice Maiden's haunting melody rose, a sound both beautiful and terrible, promising judgment without end. The moment stretched taut, between past and future, between forgiveness and fury. And then the reckoning began. The forest seemed to breathe around them, each exhale a whisper of frost curling through the gnarled branches overhead. Elena's boots crunched softly on the frozen underbrush, her eyes narrowing against the biting wind that carried the Ice Maiden's mournful song like a dagger through the silence. The officer stumbled behind her, clutching his coat tighter, the weight of his unease pressing heavily on his shoulders. "Do you hear that?" Elena's voice was low, steady, an anchor amid the rising dread. The officer nodded, swallowing hard. "It's like the forest itself is crying." Elena's grip tightened on her relic blade, its ancient runes faintly pulsing with an otherworldly light. The sniper rifle slung across her back felt heavier now, burdened not just by its weight, but by the knowledge that bullets might not be enough against what awaited them. Deeper into the cathedral of twisted branches they moved, the shadows thickening, the air growing colder still. Frost glazed the trunks, glittering faintly as if the very soul of the forest was crystallizing into a frozen tomb. Somewhere ahead, the Ice Maiden's pale light flickered like a ghostly beacon, illuminating a clearing that seemed suspended between worlds. Elena's breath came in sharp gusts, plumes of vapor dissolving into the air. "We're close," she whispered. "The forest remembers every sin, the greed, the lies, the blood spilled without remorse. It's time to pay the price." The officer swallowed again, his eyes wide as the haunting melody rose, threading through the trees like an ancient lament. And then, from the frost-laden shadows, she emerged. The Ice Maiden herself, her form ethereal and terrifying, eyes like shards of glacial ice that pierced through the darkness. Justice had come, and the reckoning would be merciless. The wind whispered through the skeletal branches, carrying with it a mournful song, fragile yet razor-sharp, slicing through the brittle silence of the frost-bitten forest. Elena tightened her grip on the relic axe strapped to her back, the ancient runes along its haft faintly glowing with a pale, ethereal light. Beside her, the militia officer shifted nervously, his breath forming ghostly clouds in the frigid air. "Do you hear it?" Elena's voice was low, barely audible over the haunting melody. "The Ice Maiden is stirring." He swallowed hard, eyes darting among the shadows that seemed to grow deeper, as if the trees themselves were leaning in to listen. "The children," he murmured, voice thick with dread. "If she's awake, none of us are safe." From the darkness ahead, the song intensified, an otherworldly lament that echoed with the weight of centuries. The very ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse, frost spreading like a creeping sickness. Shapes flickered just beyond the veil of vision, silhouettes of wisps and frozen tears hanging in the air. Elena stepped forward, unwavering. This forest remembers every sin whispered beneath its canopy. The greed of Zelenaya Roshcha's gilded walls, the lies buried beneath their foundations, it all festers here. A sudden gust whipped through the clearing, carrying with it a chilling presence. The Ice Maiden materialized, her form translucent and shimmering with frost, eyes like shards of frozen sorrow piercing through the gloom. Her voice, when she spoke, was both a dirge and a decree. Justice will be claimed, and the debt paid in blood and cold. Elena met her gaze without flinching, raising the relic axe so that the runes flared brighter. Then let it begin. The forest exhaled, and the reckoning unfolded, silent, merciless, and absolute.